In the last video, we were working on this experimental code. We were doing what I call a spike. We were just testing things out and seeing how the OAuth flow works. And we're going to continue that here. We're actually going to continue it for a couple of videos. But what we want to do in this video is, one, we want to check the state, and we want to verify that the state that we're setting whenever we send the user off to Dropbox is the same when we get back. So we're going to see how to do that using cookies. And I'll explain why we need to use cookies when we get there. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the code that we get back, and we're going to see how you exchange that for an OAuth token that you can then use to make API requests. So before we jump in, I'm going to talk about the code a little bit. So if you look here at our Dropbox app we set up, you'll notice that we have this allow implicit grant. So there's two types of ways you can do OAuth. There's the authorization code method, and then there's the implicit grant. So there's probably other ways too, but those are the two that we're going to talk about here. When you do those, the primary difference is that the implicit grant will give you a token back that you can immediately start making API calls. Well, the problem with this, and I say problem, it's not a huge problem, but one of the problems with this is that we've never used this app secret here to, communicate with the Dropbox API. It was send the user to Dropbox with our app key, then they come back with the token and we use it. So Dropbox, since we set the redirect URIs, there's a very good chance that, we are that user and that we're not, that it's not somebody making, some nefarious website that pretends to be us. But on the off chance that, maybe it's another website that doesn't have a redirect URI set up correct, or maybe they had it set up for an old domain and somebody bought that old domain, the problem you'll run into is that somebody who has that old domain could then send them back to their website. They would get the token and they could pretend to be you using their Dropbox even though they're not. So what we do to sort of prevent that is we have this implicit grant where instead of getting the actual token back, you get a code. And with that code, you use your app secret here, which is hidden, and nobody else knows except for you because it's set in your config file and it's never exposed anywhere. It's never in the query parameters or anything. And you use that secret plus that grant, and you message Dropbox privately without the user being involved, and you say, all right, I got this code from this user, and here's my app secret. Can you turn it into a token for me? And Dropbox will verify, all right, this secret and this app key are both linked to your account. This code is a valid code. Here's a token. So it kind of just gives your users a little bit more protection. It's not a ton more, but a little bit more, so that you have to do an extra API call to get that token back, but it just gives them that extra protection it's worth doing, in my opinion. So I should also say another reason why it's usually worth doing is because most applications support the authorization code method, and don't support the implicit grant. Most of the time, you'll either see applications that support both, or they just support the code method. So because of that, using the code method is usually your safest bet. Okay, so jumping to this code. We want this state here that we have. We want to verify in this callback that the state is the one that we set. So when we get here, we're going to look up the state, but we want to verify that it's the one that we set. The problem with this is that our server doesn't remember anything about the user, aside from what stuff we store in cookies. So for us to remember what state we gave them, we need to make sure that state is stored somewhere where we can look it up. And the easiest way to do that is a cookie. So what we're going to do here is we're going to create a cookie, and it's going to be http.cookie. And in this, we're just going to go ahead and say the name. We need a name for it. You can use whatever name you want. Just make sure you're consistent across your application. I'm going to use OAuth state with an underscore. And that's something that eventually we might want to move to a constant, but for now I think it's fine just to be a string that we're hard coding. The value is going to be that state that we just set, this right here. And then we can add things like HTTP only if you want. We don't really need an expiration. You could add one if you wanted. You could say like in 5 minutes, maybe expire it. You could say HTTP only. It's really up to you as to what security settings you're going to use for that. None of them are super, super important because this isn't like a really sensitive data inside of this cookie. And anytime the user tries to connect again, we'll probably overwrite the cookie with a new one. So it's not a huge deal. All right, so finally we need to set the cookie using the HTTP package. So we're going to pass in W, and we use an and sign here because this cookie up here is not a pointer, and we want to make sure we dereference it into an address right here, so we have a pointer. So that should set the cookie before we redirect the user. So this code is getting a state, setting a cookie on the user, figuring out the URL, and redirecting them. That's everything that's going on there. We'll get rid of that print line. We don't need that anymore. So in the callback, we want to parse the form like we're doing here, but instead of printing out the code and the state, we're going to go ahead and assign them to variables. So we're going to say state is going to be r.form value state. And then after we get the state, we want to go ahead and verify that the state is the state that we actually set on the user, the one we set in the cookie. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say cookie, comma, error is request.cookie, and then we pass in the name. So this is that OAuth state name that we gave it up top, and we're getting that cookie from the request. So if there's an error, it won't be equal to nil. And at this point, we want to go ahead and do something. We want to, print out some sort of message. So what we're going to do is just http.error. And this is one of the nice things about sort of doing a spike is that I've mentioned earlier, you shouldn't just print out random error messages to the end user. But when we're doing a spike, we can do it because we know we're going to refactor all of this code. And we know that this isn't something that is going to be permanent. But we do want to see the error so that as we're debugging, we can see what it is. So we're just going to do error.error, which will return a string. And the code, I'm going to use http.status bad request, because if the state is not valid, it means something about that request was wrong. Either the user got redirected from another website or something else happened. It's not an internal server error or anything like that. It means that something with that request was wrong. And then we'll return. So if we don't get inside of this block, we know the cookie's valid. So at this point, what we're going to do is we're going to check to see if that cookie was not nil. We need to make sure it's not nil because I don't know if the error catches that. The other thing is we need to check that the value is equal to our state. Well, if either of these two things happen, it's actually the same as coming in here and doing this whole part. So what we could do is do something like else if cookie is equal to nil or cookie.value is not equal to state. If either of those two things happen, that means that this cookie just isn't valid. So what we're going to do here is another http.error. And this time we're going to say invalid state provided. And http.status bad request. And then we'll return. So we cover those both in the if and then the else if. So if we get out of this whole section, that means that it all was correct. That's why I'm kind of doing this as an else if, is if there's an error, we don't need to check the second part, even though we return. And if there's the else if part, we'll do that. So after that, we know that our cookie is good. We know that our state's good. There's no real reason to keep that cookie around. So what we're going to do is delete it. We're going to say cookie.value is equal to the empty string cookie.expires is equal to time.now. And we're going to say http.setCookie. W and this actually, we don't need an and here. So this cookie here that we got back is, it's already a pointer. So we don't have to, put the and sign in front of it. All right. So assuming that's all working, we have everything we need to do in order to, verify the state. That's what was going on here. The last thing we want to do is take the code that we got and we want to exchange that code for a token. So if we look over here, I think it's in the config example we can look at. You'll see down here this calls this config.exchange method, and it passes in a context, and then with the code is a second argument, and it gets a token or an error back. So this is what we want to do is this little bit here, and that's what we're going to be writing in our code. So I will say with the context, we do have a context from our request, and we could use that context. A lot of times that would make sense and it would be fine. But for now, I'm just going to go ahead and use context.todo, which basically is a filler that says, we're not 100% sure which context we want, so we're just going to use this for the time being and we'll replace it. So we're going to do dbx OAuth, which is our config.exchange, and we're going to use context.todo. And then the code is going to be the code that we get up here, but we aren't actually processing it. So let's go ahead and do that here. Code is equal to r.form value code. And then here we want the token and the error. And we're going to say if error is not equal to nil, we'll do http.error. And again, we're just gonna print out the actual error message. And we'll do bad request. Otherwise, we need to print out this cookie or this token. So we're gonna, let's go ahead and let's do fprintf. That way I can do %+v, which is kind of a verbose way of printing out something. And then I'll pass in the token, and then we'll get to actually see what that whole token looks like. So let me see what is going on. I think I have too many parentheses at the end. Yeah, I do. Okay. Oh, I need the W here at the start. When you do fprintf instead of just printf, you need to give it something to write to, a writer to write to. So that's what this W is. Okay, I think that's everything for this right now. We're going to go ahead and test this code. Go run star.go. And we're going to hope that this all works. I am logged in. Not that that matters just yet, but it's nice to know. All right, so we're getting this token back, and you'll see it printed out here, which means that all of our code is working correctly. So we have the token. We're not going to do anything with it just yet. In the next video, we're going to look at how to persist that token. We're going to look at which fields are in the token, how we persist it, and then I think the follow-up video is when we actually look at using that token to make some HTTP requests and to connect to the Dropbox API. But for now, this is all we wanted to do. We wanted to look at the basic OAuth flow of redirecting the user, setting a state, verifying a state, and then taking the code we get back and exchanging it for a token. So at this point, we have a user's token. We have completed the OAuth flow, and the rest of this is going to be like things we do on our end to make use of that token we get from the flow.